"Sir, I need you to step off this aircraft right now." Every head turned. Every conversation stopped. The entire cabin of Flight 447 from Columbus, Ohio to Washington, D.C. fell silent as a graveyard at midnight. Jason Bennett sat frozen in seat 12A, his hands visible on the armrests, his face calm, but his heart pounding like a drum. Around him, passengers pulled out their phones. Some started recording. Others whispered to each other, already deciding what they thought had happened. Caroline stood in the aisle, her face red, her finger pointing at Jason like he was the most dangerous person she'd ever seen. 2 security officers were already making their way down the narrow walkway toward him. I said, "Get up." Caroline's voice grew louder. "You don't belong on this plane." Jason's jaw tightened. In his pocket, hidden from view, was a small device no bigger than a quarter. On that device were codes that could save hundreds of lives. He had exactly 47 minutes to get to Washington, D.C., 47 minutes before everything went terribly, terribly wrong. But right now, none of that mattered. Right now, he was just another black man being told he didn't belong. "Ma'am," Jason said quietly, his voice steady despite the storm building inside him. "I have a ticket. I'm in my assigned seat. Is there a problem?" "Don't play games with me." Caroline snapped. She turned to the passengers around them, her eyes wide and dramatic. This man tried to enter the cockpit. I saw him. He was testing the door handle. Gasps erupted throughout the cabin. Jason's blood ran cold. That wasn't true. That wasn't even close to true. "I never went near the cockpit," Jason said, louder now so everyone could hear. "I walked from the entrance to my seat. That's all I did." "Liar," Caroline shrieked. The security officers reached Jason's row. They were big men with hard faces and hands that moved toward their belts where handcuffs waited. "I know what I saw. You were acting suspicious from the moment you boarded." An older white woman in the seat behind Jason clutched her purse tighter. A young couple across the aisle moved their daughter away from Jason's row. Fear spread through the cabin like poison in water. Jason could feel it. That familiar, crushing weight. The weight of being guilty until proven innocent. The weight of being feared for simply existing in a space where someone decided you didn't belong. "Sir, we need you to come with us," one of the security officers said. His hand was on Jason's shoulder now, gripped tight and commanding. "On what grounds?" Jason asked, still calm, still controlled. Years of training kept his voice level even as his mind raced through options. He couldn't reveal who he was. Not here. Not now. His mission was classified at the highest level. If he exposed himself, if he showed his CIA credentials, the wrong people would know he was coming. The mission would fail. People would die. But if he didn't show his credentials, he'd be dragged off this plane. He'd miss his deadline. The mission would fail anyway. People would still die. "We'll discuss this off the aircraft," the second officer said. They were pulling him up now, hands under his arms, lifting him from his seat, whether he cooperated or not. "Wait!" A voice called out from the back of the plane. "Wait!" Everyone turned. A teenage boy stood up, his phone in his hand, his face pale but determined. "I recorded everything." He didn't go near the cockpit. He walked straight to his seat. "I have it all on video." Caroline's face changed. For just a second, something flickered across her expression. Was it doubt? Was it fear that she'd been caught in a lie? "That doesn't prove anything," Caroline said quickly, her voice rising to a pitch that sounded almost desperate. He could have tried before this young man started recording. He looked suspicious. He was sweating. He kept looking around. "It's 90 degrees in this cabin," an older black woman said from across the aisle, standing up now too. Her voice was strong and clear. "We're all sweating. And we're all looking around because you're making a scene. I'm doing my job." Caroline shot back. "I'm keeping this flight safe." The security officers paused, looking at each other, uncertain now. The situation was escalating. People were taking sides. The cabin was dividing right down the middle. Jason could see it happening, could see passengers looking at him, trying to decide. Was he dangerous? Was he innocent? Did it matter what the truth was if Caroline Foster believed, or claimed to believe? He was a threat? Please, Jason said, and for the first time, there was emotion in his voice. Not anger, not fear, something deeper, something that came from years of the same situation in different forms. Please, just check my ticket. Check my ID. I'm supposed to be here. I have every right to be on this plane. Caroline's lip curled. People like you always have an excuse. The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire. People like you. Everyone knew what she meant. Everyone heard what she wasn't quite saying out loud. The teenage boy with the phone was still recording. The older black woman had her hand over her mouth, tears in her eyes. A middle-aged white man in a business suit stood up and said, "This is wrong. This is clearly wrong." But others stayed silent. Others looked away. Others decided that their comfort, their schedule, their flight was more important than standing up for what was right. The captain's voice suddenly crackled over the intercom. "Flight attendants, please report to the front of the aircraft immediately." Caroline's eyes widened. She looked at the security officers, then back at Jason, then toward the cockpit. "Don't let him move," she hissed at the officers. Then she turned and rushed toward the front of the plane, her shoes clicking rapidly on the floor. Jason sat back down, the officer's hands still on his shoulders. His watch showed 42 minutes until the deadline. 42 minutes until the information on the device in his pocket became useless. 42 minutes until a terrorist cell in Washington, D.C. activated a plan that would change everything. And he was stuck on a plane in Ohio, being accused of a crime he didn't commit by a woman who seemed determined to see him as guilty no matter what the truth was. The cabin was buzzing now. Voices everywhere, some supportive, some afraid, some angry. The teenage boy was uploading his video to social media. The woman behind Jason was on the phone with someone, describing everything in rapid, frightened whispers. Jason closed his eyes. He thought about his training. He thought about all the missions he'd completed, all the lives he'd saved, all the times he'd put himself in danger for his country. And now he might fail the most important mission of his career, because of one flight attendant who looked at his skin color and decided he was dangerous. The captain emerged from the cockpit. He was walking down the aisle toward Jason's seat. His face was serious, unreadable. Behind him, Caroline followed, her expression triumphant. Jason's phone buzzed in his pocket. A message from headquarters. Just 2 words. Deadline critical. 41 minutes left. The captain stopped at Jason's row. He looked down at Jason for a long, heavy moment. Then he opened his mouth to speak. If you believe and know one should be judged by the color of their skin, hit that like button right now. Don't scroll past this injustice. Subscribe if you stand against racial profiling and believe in treating everyone with dignity and respect. Share this story to spread awareness. Silence only helps discrimination continue. Comment below. Have you ever witnessed or experienced something like this? What would you have done in Jason's situation? The captain's eyes moved from Jason to Caroline, then to the security officers still gripping Jason's shoulders. "Release him," the captain said firmly. Caroline's mouth dropped open. "Captain Morrison, you can't be serious. This man." "I said release him. Now." Captain Morrison's voice was like steel. The security officers immediately let go of Jason and stepped back. Jason's shoulders relaxed slightly, but his mind was racing. 39 minutes left. He needed this plane in the air. He needed to get to Washington, D.C. before it was too late. Captain Morrison turned to Caroline. "Miss Foster, I need to speak with you privately. Right now." "But, Captain..." "Now, Miss Foster." The firmness in his voice left no room for argument. Caroline's face went pale, then red, then pale again. She followed the captain toward the front of the plane, her confident stride now uncertain and shaky. The cabin erupted in whispers the moment they were out of earshot. "I can't believe she tried to do that," someone muttered. "She should be fired," another voice said. But Jason also heard other voices. Quieter ones, more careful ones. "Well, we don't know what really happened. Better safe than sorry these days. She was just doing her job." Jason stared at the seat in front of him. He'd heard it all before. The defenses, The excuses, the ways people convinced themselves that discrimination was actually protection. The older black woman from across the aisle leaned over. Her name tag said Dorothy, and her eyes were kind but sad. "Are you all right, son?" Jason nodded, not trusting his voice yet. "I'm sorry you had to go through that," Dorothy continued. "I'm 73 years old, and I'm still seeing the same things I saw when I was a little girl. Different costumes, same ugly play." The teenage boy who had recorded everything came up to Jason's row. He was skinny, with braces and nervous energy. "Hey, I posted the video. It's already getting shared. People are mad. Really mad." "Thank you," Jason managed to say. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," the boy said, his voice cracking slightly. "My dad always says that evil wins when good people stay quiet. I'm Ethan, by the way." "Jason." They shook hands, and Jason felt a small spark of hope. Maybe the next generation would be different. Maybe kids like Ethan would change things. But right now, Jason didn't have time to think about the future. He had 37 minutes to worry about the present. At the front of the plane, Ray's voices could be heard even through the closed cockpit area. Caroline's voice was high and defensive. Captain Morrison's responses were too quiet to make out, but his tone was clearly not pleased. Jason's phone buzzed again. Another message from headquarters. Target moving. Window closing. Status. Jason's fingers hovered over his phone. He couldn't explain the situation. Not in a text message. Not where it could be intercepted or read by the wrong people. He typed back, "Delayed. Working on it." The response came immediately. "No time for delays. Alternative plans failing. You are last option." Jason felt the weight of those words settle on his chest like concrete. He was the last option. If he failed, there was no backup, no plan B, no safety net. The device in his pocket contained information about a terrorist cell planning to release a biological weapon in Union Station during rush hour. Thousands of people would be infected. The chaos would be unimaginable. And Jason was the only person who could get the information to the field team in time to stop it. But he was stuck on a plane that hadn't even taken off yet, dealing with a flight attendant who had decided he was a threat based on nothing but her own prejudices. Captain Morrison finally emerged from the front area. Caroline was behind him, her face blotchy and red like she'd been crying. Her eyes met Jason for just a second, and he saw something there. Was it shame? Regret? Or just anger at being caught? The captain walked straight to Jason's seat and knelt down in the aisle, so they were at eye level. His voice was low, meant only for Jason to hear. "Mr. Bennett, I owe you an apology on behalf of this airline. What happened here was unacceptable. Ms. Foster has been removed from this flight and will be facing a formal investigation." Jason nodded. "Thank you, Captain. But right now, I just need to get to Washington, D.C. It's really important." Something in Jason's voice must have conveyed the urgency, because Captain Morrison's eyes narrowed slightly. He studied Jason's face for a long moment. "We'll be taking off in 10 minutes, the captain said quietly. "I'm going to get you there as fast as this bird can fly." Relief flooded through Jason. 10 minutes plus a 45-minute flight. He'd make it. Barely, but he'd make it. Captain Morrison stood up and addressed the entire cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the delay and the disturbance. We will be taking off shortly. I want to make something very clear. On my aircraft, every passenger is treated with equal respect and dignity. What happened here today was wrong, and it will be dealt with accordingly." Some passengers applauded. Others sat in uncomfortable silence. Caroline was escorted off the plane by the security officers. As she passed Jason's row, she stopped. For a moment, Jason thought she might apologize, might acknowledge what she'd done. Instead, she leaned in close and whispered, barely loud enough for him to hear, "I know what I saw. I know what you people are like." Then she was gone, leaving behind a trail of poison that Jason could still feel burning in the air. Dorothy reached across the aisle and squeezed Jason's hand. "Don't you let her hate become your hate, you hear me? Don't let her turn your heart hard." Jason squeezed back, grateful for her kindness, but unable to promise what she asked. Right now, he just felt tired. tired of having to prove he belonged everywhere he went, tired of being suspected, tired of being feared. A new flight attendant came on board. Her name was Sarah, and she was professional and kind. She checked on Jason personally, offered him water, made sure he was comfortable. It was what Caroline should have done from the start. The plane finally began to move. Jason checked his watch. 31 minutes until deadline. The flight was 45 minutes. He wasn't going to make it. His phone buzzed one more time. Field team in position. They can hold for 60 minutes max. After that, target will be gone. Hurry. Jason did the math in his head. 45-minute flight. 15 minutes to get off the plane, through the terminal, and to the meeting point. That was 60 minutes exactly. No room for error. No room for delays. No room for anything to go wrong. The plane lifted off the ground, and Jason watched Ohio disappear beneath him. He thought about Caroline Foster and her accusations. He thought about all the Caroline Fosters he'd encountered in his life. All the people who looked at him and saw a threat instead of a person, a problem instead of a human being. But he also thought about Ethan, the brave teenager with the camera. He thought about Dorothy and her kind eyes. He thought about Captain Morrison standing up for what was right, even when it would have been easier to just remove Jason from the plane. Maybe Dorothy would avoid the conflict. Maybe he couldn't let the hate turn his heart hard. The plane climbed higher, cutting through clouds. Jason closed his eyes and tried to calm his racing heart. In his pocket, the device felt like it was burning a hole through his leg. Information that could save lives. Information that only mattered if he got there in time. Sarah came by with drinks. "Can I get you anything, Mr. Bennett?" "Just water, thank you." She smiled warmly and moved on to the next row. Jason sipped his water and stared out the window at the clouds. Everything looked peaceful from up here. Clean. Simple. You couldn't see the hate from this high up. You couldn't see the fear and the prejudice and the thousand small cruelties that people inflicted on each other every day. His phone buzzed. A news alert. Ethan's video was going viral. Hashtag Justice for Jason was trending. People across the country were talking about what had happened on Flight 447. Jason scrolled through the comments. Most were supportive, outraged on his behalf, demanding that Caroline be fired, calling for the airline to do better. But there were others, comments that made his stomach turn. He probably was acting suspicious. Flight attendants are trained to spot threats. She was just being careful. Why is this about race? Maybe he really did try to open the cockpit door. Jason closed his phone. He couldn't read anymore. Not now. 23 minutes until deadline. The plane was cruising at altitude now, eating up miles. But not fast enough. Never fast enough. Jason found himself thinking about his daughter, Maya. She was 7 years old, with her mother's smile and his stubborn determination. He'd missed her birthday last month because of a mission in Europe. He'd promised her he'd make it up to her. Promised he'd take her to that amusement park she kept talking about. What if he didn't make it back? What if this mission went wrong? What if the next time someone like Caroline Foster decided he was a threat, there was no Captain Morrison to stand up for him? No Ethan with a camera? No Dorothy with kind words? The plane hit turbulence, jolting Jason from his dark thoughts. The seatbelt sign dinged on. Sarah's voice came over the intercom, calm and professional, asking everyone to remain seated. But Jason couldn't remain seated. Not in his mind. His thoughts were racing ahead to Washington, D.C., to the meeting point, to the field team waiting for the information that could stop a disaster. Dorothy was watching him from across the aisle. She could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw was clenched, the way he kept checking his watch. "Whatever you're running toward," she said softly, "I hope you make it in time." Jason looked at her, surprised. "How did you?" "I raised 4 sons," Dorothy said with a knowing smile. "I know the look of a man who's carrying something heavy, something important." Jason wanted to tell her, wanted to explain that he wasn't just a victim of discrimination, that he was a CIA agent, that he was trying to save lives, that everything that had happened on this plane had put hundreds of innocent people in danger. But he couldn't. The mission was classified. His identity was classified. As far as the world knew, He was just Jason Bennett, another black man who'd been profiled and accused of something he didn't do. "I hope I make it too," Jason said quietly. The turbulence passed. The plane smoothed out, but Jason's heart kept racing. 17 minutes until deadline. Somewhere below them, hidden in the massive sprawl of the American landscape, were people planning to hurt others, planning to create chaos and fear, planning to take advantage of the worst parts of human nature. And somewhere else, also below them, were people like Ethan and Dorothy and Captain Morrison. People who stood up, people who spoke out, people who chose to be kind even when it was uncomfortable. Jason didn't know which group was bigger, which group would win in the end. He only knew that for the next 17 minutes, he had a hope that good people moved faster than bad ones. The captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our descent into Washington, D.C. We'll be landing in approximately 15 minutes. 15 minutes to land." Then Jason had to move faster than he'd ever moved in his life. He reached into his pocket and touched the device. Still there, still safe, still ticking down to a deadline he might not make. The plane descended through the clouds, and Washington, D.C. appeared below like a model city, all tiny buildings and toy cars and impossible smallness. But Jason knew better. He knew how big the city really was. How many people filled its streets? How many lives depended on what happened in the next few minutes? The wheels touched down with a screech and a bounce. The plane taxied toward the gate. Every second felt like an hour. Jason unbuckled his seatbelt before the plane even stopped moving. Sarah shot him a look, but didn't say anything. Maybe she understood. Maybe Captain Morrison had told the crew something. The plane finally stopped. The seatbelt sign dinged off. Jason was already standing, already moving toward the exit before anyone else had even grabbed their bags. "Good luck," Dorothy called after him. "Whatever it is, I hope you make it," Ethan added. Jason didn't look back. Couldn't look back. He had 12 minutes. The door opened. Jason exploded into the jetway, running full speed toward the terminal. People jumped out of his way. Startled, some yelled after him. Security guards looked up, hands moving toward their radios. Jason didn't care. He ran harder, through the terminal, past the shops and restaurants, past the families and the business travelers, and the people whose biggest worry was whether their connecting flight was on time. 7 minutes. Jason burst through the exit doors into the humid Washington, D.C. air. His contact was supposed to be at the pickup zone. A black SUV. License plate ending in 447. Jason's eyes scanned the line of vehicles. Taxis, Ubers, shuttles, personal cars. No black SUV. 5 minutes. Jason's heart sank. Had they left? Had they given up? Had his delay cost hundreds of lives? Then he saw it, pulling up to the curb at the far end of the pickup zone. A black SUV. License plate ending in 447. Jason sprinted toward it, his lungs burning, his legs screaming. The back door opened. A woman's voice called out, "Bennett, now!" Jason dove into the SUV. The door slammed shut behind him. The vehicle was already moving before he could even sit up properly. "Did you make it?" Jason gasped, checking his watch. "Did we?" The woman in the passenger seat turned around. She had sharp eyes and no-nonsense expression. "We have 90 seconds before the target boards his train. The team is in position, but they need the codes right now." Jason fumbled in his pocket for the device. His hands were shaking from adrenaline and exhaustion. He pulled it out and handed it to the woman. She plugged it into a laptop, and her fingers flew over the keyboard. Seconds ticked by. 60, 50, 40. "Come on," Jason whispered. "Come on, Camion, come on." 30 seconds. The woman's face was tense, concentrated. 20 seconds. "Got it," she said. "Transmitting now." 10 seconds. Jason held his breath. 5 seconds. The woman's phone rang. She answered, listened for a moment, then looked back at Jason. Her expression was unreadable. "They got him," she said quietly. "Target is in custody. Weapon secured. No casualties." Jason fell back against the seat. his entire body going limp with relief. They'd done it. He'd done it, despite everything. Despite Caroline Foster and her accusations. Despite the delay and the hate and the prejudice. Lives had been saved. But as the SUV drove through the streets of Washington, D.C., Jason couldn't help but think about how close it had been, how easily it could have gone wrong, how one flight attendant's bias had almost cost hundreds of people their lives. And he thought about all the Jason Bennetts out there who weren't CIA agents, who didn't have urgent missions or classified information, who were just regular people trying to live their lives, constantly facing suspicion and accusations for no reason other than the color of their skin. What happened to them when there was no Captain Morrison to stand up for them? No Ethan to record the truth? No viral video to prove their innocence? The woman in the passenger seat was looking at him in the rear-view mirror. "You all right, Bennett?" Jason nodded slowly. Yeah, I'm all right." But he wasn't sure if that was true. The SUV turned a corner, and through the window, Jason could see Union Station in the distance. Thousands of people moving through it, unaware of how close they'd come to disaster, unaware that they'd been saved by a man who'd almost been thrown off a plane for looking suspicious. The woman's phone buzzed. She read the message and smiled grimly. "Looks like your flight attendant is all over the news. The airline just released a statement. She's been terminated." Jason felt nothing. No satisfaction. No vindication. Just tiredness. "Good," he said simply. But he knew it wasn't enough. One flight attendant fired wouldn't change the system. Wouldn't change the fear and prejudice that lived in people's hearts. The SUV pulled up to an unmarked building. "Debrief in 30 minutes, the woman said. "Go clean up. You look like hell." Jason climbed out of the vehicle, his legs still shaky from the sprint through the airport. As he walked toward the building, his phone buzzed one final time. It was a text from an unknown number. "Thank you for everything you do, Dorothy." Somehow, the old woman from the plane had found his number, had reached out to make sure he knew he was appreciated. Jason felt tears prick at his eyes. He blinked them back, took a deep breath, and walked into the building. The mission was over. But Jason knew that tomorrow there would be another flight, another Caroline Foster, another moment where he'd have to prove he belonged in a space that someone decided he shouldn't occupy. And the question that haunted him as he walked through the secured doors wasn't whether he could handle it. It was how many more times he'd have to. Jason stood in the shower, letting scalding water pour over his exhausted body. His muscles ached. His mind wouldn't stop racing. He'd saved hundreds of lives today. Maybe thousands. The terrorist plot had been stopped. The weapon was secured. The bad guys were in custody. But all he could think about was Caroline Foster's face. The way she looked at him like he was something dangerous. Something that didn't belong. "I know what you people are like," she'd whispered. Those words echoed in his head, louder than the congratulations he received from his superiors. Louder than the thank you message from Dorothy. Louder than everything else. Jason turned off the water and dried himself mechanically. His phone sat on the counter, buzzing constantly. Messages, emails, news alerts. The video Ethan had posted was everywhere now. Millions of views, thousands of comments. News stations were covering it. Civil rights organizations were demanding investigations. Jason Bennett was becoming famous for all the wrong reasons. He got dressed in fresh clothes from his go bag and checked the time. 20 minutes until his debrief. He sat on the edge of the bed in the small room they'd given him and finally allowed himself to really think about what had happened. What if Caroline had succeeded? What if she'd gotten him thrown off that plane? What if there had been no Captain Morrison? No Ethan with a camera? No viral video? The mission would have failed. People would have died. And Jason would have been stuck in some airport security office, trying to prove he wasn't a terrorist while actual terrorists carried out their plan. All because one woman looked at his skin and decided he was guilty. A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. "Bennett, it's time." Jason stood up, straightened his shoulders, and walked out into the hallway. The building was a maze of corridors and secure rooms. He'd been here dozens of times before, but today it felt different. Colder, more distant. The debrief room was small and windowless. 3 people waited for him. Director Chin sat at the head of the table, her expression neutral. Beside her was Agent Rodriguez, who'd been his handler on this mission. And across from them sat someone Jason didn't recognize, a woman in an expensive suit with sharp, calculating eyes. "Bennett, sit," Director Chin said. It wasn't a request. Jason sat. "First things first," Chin continued. "Excellent work today. The operation was a success. The target is in custody. The weapon has been secured, and we've identified 2 additional cells connected to the plot. You did what needed to be done." "Thank you, ma'am. However," Chen's voice hardened, "we need to discuss what happened on that flight." Jason's stomach tightened. Here it comes, he thought. The woman in the suit leaned forward. "Mr. Bennett, I'm Sandra Mitchell from the airline's legal department. We're conducting a thorough investigation into the incident involving Ms. Foster. I need to ask you some questions." "I already gave a statement to Captain Morrison," Jason said carefully. "Yes, and we reviewed that statement along with the video evidence," Mitchell replied. "But there are some complications." "Complications?" Mitchell pulled out a tablet and turned it toward Jason. On the screen was a frozen image from security footage. Jason walking through the airport terminal before boarding. "Can you explain why you were at gate C-17 before gate B-8, where your actual flight was departing?" Jason's mind raced. Gate C-17. That had been his original gate. His ticket had been changed at the last minute by the CIA to get him on the earlier flight to Washington. It was all part of the mission logistics. But he couldn't say that. "I made a mistake," Jason said. "I went to the wrong gate first, realized my error, and went to correct gate." Mitchell's eyes narrowed. "You went to gate C-17, looked at the departure board for approximately 47 seconds, then walked directly to gate B-8. That doesn't sound like someone who made a mistake. That sounds like someone who was checking something, confirming something." Jason felt the trap closing. He couldn't explain the real reason without compromising his cover, but his hesitation was making him look suspicious. Director Chin intervened. "Ms. Mitchell, Mr. Bennett's movements through the airport are not relevant to whether or not he was wrongfully accused by your flight attendant. With respect, Director Chun, they are relevant to whether Ms. Foster had any legitimate security concerns," Mitchell countered. "Ms. Foster claims that Mr. Bennett exhibited several behaviors consistent with hostile surveillance, checking multiple gates, appearing nervous and sweating, looking around frequently, keeping his hands in his pockets. It was 90 degrees in that terminal." Agent Rodriguez interjected. Everyone was sweating. "Perhaps," Mitchell said smoothly, "but combined with his unusual gate behavior and the fact that he had only a carry-on bag for what should have been a multi-day business trip, according to his ticket, Ms. Foster's concerns begin to look less like racial profiling and more like legitimate security awareness." Jason felt anger rising in his chest. They were twisting everything, taking normal behavior and making it look suspicious because they needed to protect the airline from a lawsuit. "I had a carry-on because I travel light," Jason said, his voice tight. "I checked multiple gates because I initially went to the wrong one. I was sweating because it was hot, and I kept my hands in my pockets because that's where I keep my hands. None of that gives anyone the right to accuse me of trying to break into a cockpit. No one is saying Miss Foster handled the situation correctly," Mitchell replied. "But this isn't as clear-cut as the video makes it appear. There's context that the public isn't seeing. The context," Director Chin said coldly, "is that your flight attendant profiled one of my agents and nearly caused a national security incident. If Mr. Bennett had missed that flight, if he hadn't gotten the information to my team in time, we'd be dealing with mass casualties right now. So, please, spare me the legal gymnastics about context." Mitchell's face hardened. "Are you admitting that Mr. Bennett is a federal agent? Because if so, that changes the entire narrative of this incident." Jason saw the trap immediately. If the CIA confirmed he was an agent, it would undermine the discrimination case. The airline could claim that Caroline had somehow sensed something different about him, that she hadn't been profiling based on race, but had legitimately detected something unusual about a man on a covert mission. The truth would become a shield for prejudice. "This meeting is over," Chin said abruptly. "Mr. Bennett's employment status is classified. You have your answer from Captain Morrison's investigation. Ms. Foster made unfounded accusations. End of story." Mitchell stood slowly, gathering her tablet. "Director Chun, the airline is facing massive public backlash. Our stock has dropped 4% today. We have protests planned at airports across the country. If there's any information that can help us, then you should have trained your employees better." Chin cut her off. "Good day, Ms. Mitchell." The lawyer left, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. When the door closed, Chin turned to Jason. "You need to disappear for a while. This story is too big. Your face is everywhere. We're pulling you from active field duty until this dies down." Jason's heart sank. "Ma'am, I can still—" "No," Chin said firmly. "You're compromised. Every airport security officer in the country has seen your face now. You're useless for covert work." The words hit Jason like a physical blow. Useless. Because he'd been profiled. Because someone had accused him of being dangerous. Because defending himself had made him famous. "How long?" Jason asked quietly. 6 months minimum. Maybe longer. Chen's expression softened slightly. "I'm sorry, Bennett. I really am. You did everything right today. You're a good agent. One of our best. But this is the reality we're dealing with." Jason nodded numbly. 6 months. Maybe longer. His career derailed not by failure, but by success. Not by his mistakes, but by someone else's prejudice. "Dismissed," Chin said. Jason stood and walked out of the room in a daze. In the hallway, Agent Rodriguez caught up with him. "For what it's worth," Rodriguez said quietly, "this is bullshit. Complete bullshit." "Yeah," Jason agreed. "It is." He walked through the building and out into the late afternoon sun. His phone buzzed again. Another news alert. Another opinion piece. Another think tank weighing in on what had happened to him. Everyone had something to say about Jason Bennett, but nobody had asked Jason Bennett what he wanted to say. He got into his car and just sat there for a long moment, staring at nothing. Then his phone rang. Unknown number. Jason almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Hello, Jason Bennett?" A woman's voice, professional, clipped. "Who's asking?" "My name is Rebecca Lawson. I'm a producer for 60 Minutes. We'd like to interview you about what happened on Flight 447. We want to tell your story. The real story. Would you be interested?" Jason closed his eyes. Tell his story. Put himself out there even more. Make himself even more visible. Even more compromised. But maybe that was the point. Maybe being visible was the only way to change things. Maybe silence was what allowed people like Caroline Foster to keep making assumptions, keep profiling, keep judging people based on fear instead of facts. "Mr. Bennett?" Rebecca prompted. "Are you still there?" Jason opened his eyes and looked up at the building he'd just left. The building where he'd been told he was useless now, where his career had been put on hold because he'd been a victim. "Yeah," Jason said slowly. "Yeah, I'm still here. So, will you do the interview?" Jason thought about his daughter Maya, about the world she was growing up in, about whether things would be any different for her if people like him stayed quiet. He thought about Dorothy and Ethan and Captain Morrison, about the good people who'd spoken up when it mattered. Maybe it was his turn to speak up in a different way. When? Jason asked. 3 days later, Jason sat in a television studio in New York City. Small microphones clipped to his shirt, bright lights making him squint. Rebecca Lawson sat across from him, her notes organized on her lap, her expression warm but professional. Behind the cameras, a dozen crew members moved quietly, adjusting lights and checking sound levels. Jason's hands were sweating. He'd faced armed terrorists without flinching. He'd infiltrated criminal organizations without breaking cover. He'd stared down death more times than he could count. But this terrified him. "We'll start with some easy questions," Rebecca said, sensing his nervousness. "Just tell your story. Be honest. Be yourself." Jason nodded. Be yourself. When had that ever been safe? The director counted down. In 5, 4, 3, he finished with his fingers. 2, 1. The cameras were rolling. Mr. Bennett, Rebecca began, her voice steady and clear. 3 days ago, you were removed from a flight in Ohio after a flight attendant accused you of trying to break into the cockpit. Can you tell us what happened that day? Jason took a breath. I boarded Flight 447 from Columbus to Washington, D.C. like any other passenger. I had a ticket. I had ID. I went to my assigned seat. That's all I did. And then the flight attendant, Caroline Foster, started accusing me of trying to enter the cockpit, which I never did. I walked from the entrance straight to my seat. Nothing more. Rebecca leaned forward slightly. What went through your mind when she made that accusation? Jason paused. What had gone through his mind? Fear, anger, exhaustion, the crushing weight of being presumed guilty. I thought, here we go again, Jason said quietly. Another space where I don't belong. Another person who looks at me and sees a threat instead of a human being. This wasn't the first time something like this has happened to you. No, Jason said. Jason's jaw tightened. Can you tell us about I've been followed in stores by security. I've been pulled over by police for matching a description. I've had people clutch their purses when I get on an elevator. I've been asked to show ID in buildings where I work. These things happen so often that you almost stop noticing them. Almost. But this was different, Rebecca said. This time, there was video evidence. This time, the world was watching. Yes, Jason agreed. This time, people could see exactly what happened. They couldn't explain it away, couldn't make excuses. The truth was right there on video. Rebecca glanced at her notes. We reached out to Caroline Foster for comment. She declined to appear on camera, but she did provide a written statement. She says, and I quote, I was doing my job to keep passengers safe. I observed suspicious behavior and reported it according to my training. I regret that the situation escalated, but I stand by my initial concerns. Jason felt heat rising in his chest. What suspicious behavior? Walking to my seat? Existing while black? She specifically mentioned that you appeared nervous, were sweating, and kept your hands in your pockets. The cabin was 90 degrees, Jason said, his voice rising despite himself. Everyone was sweating. And I keep my hands in my pockets because that's where I keep my hands. When did normal human behavior become suspicious? When it's done by someone who looks like you? Rebecca asked gently. Jason looked directly into the camera. Yes, exactly. When it's done by someone who looks like me. Rebecca let that statement hang in the air for a moment before continuing. Jason, there's something we need to address. There are rumors circulating online that you're not just a regular passenger. Some people are speculating that you're in law enforcement or intelligence. Can you comment on that? Jason had prepared for this question. The CIA had coached him on what he could and couldn't say. I can't discuss my employment in detail, Jason said carefully. What I can say is that I'm a law-abiding citizen who is traveling for legitimate business purposes. Whether I'm a teacher, a businessman, or anything else shouldn't matter. What matters is that I was judged and accused without cause. But if you were traveling on government business, sensitive government business, doesn't that change the situation? Doesn't that mean you might have been exhibiting behavior that a trained flight attendant could pick up on? There it was. The trap. The justification for prejudice dressed up as logic. No, Jason said firmly. It doesn't change anything. Caroline Foster didn't accuse me because she detected some subtle spy behavior. She accused me because she saw a black man and decided I was dangerous. If I had been white, doing exactly the same things, she wouldn't have given me a second glance. You sound very certain of that. I am certain, Jason said, because I've lived it. Because every black person watching this interview right now has lived it. We know the difference between legitimate security concerns and racial profiling. We've been dealing with it our entire lives. Rebecca nodded slowly. What do you want people to understand about what happened to you? Jason thought about that question. What did he want people to understand? I want people to understand that this isn't just about one flight attendant on one airplane, Jason said. This is about a system that teaches people to be afraid of black bodies, that trains people to see us as threats before they see us as humans. Caroline Foster isn't some uniquely evil person. She's a product of the same society we all live in, a society that bombards us with messages about who is dangerous and who is safe. And those messages are killing us. Killing you? Rebecca pressed. Yes, Jason said. Because sometimes these encounters don't end with video evidence and viral hashtags. Sometimes they end with someone dead on the ground. Sometimes they end with families destroyed. Sometimes they end with another name added to the list of people who were judged guilty before they had a chance to prove their innocence. Rebecca was quiet for a moment. What do you think should happen to Caroline Foster? Jason had thought about this question a lot over the past 3 days. The airline had fired her. The internet was calling for her head. People were digging up her social media, looking for evidence of racism, turning her into a symbol of everything wrong with America. I think she should face consequences for what she did, Jason said. But I also think she needs education. She needs to confront her biases. She needs to understand the harm she caused. Firing her and moving on doesn't solve anything. The next Caroline Foster is already out there, already making assumptions, already profiling people based on fear. So what's the solution? The solution is for all of us, every single person watching this, to examine our own biases, to question our own assumptions, to ask ourselves, when I see someone who looks different from me, what story am I telling myself about them? And is that story based on facts or fear? Rebecca glanced at the camera, then back to Jason. You mentioned your daughter earlier, before we started filming. What do you want her to know about what happened? Jason felt his throat tighten. Maya, his beautiful, innocent, 7-year-old daughter, who still believed the world was fair and just. I want her to know that her father didn't do anything wrong, Jason said, his voice breaking slightly. I want her to know that when people treat her unfairly, it's not because of anything she did. It's because of what they fear. And I want her to know that she should never, ever make herself smaller to make other people comfortable. She has every right to take up space in this world. Do you worry about her future? About what she'll face? Every single day, Jason admitted, I worry that she'll be followed in stores, that she'll be pulled over for no reason, that she'll walk onto an airplane and some will decide she's dangerous. I worry that I can't protect her from the Caroline Fosters of the world, that all my training, all my skills, all my experience mean nothing when it comes to shielding my daughter from prejudice. What gives you hope? Jason thought about Ethan, the teenage boy with a camera, about Dorothy and her kind words, about Captain Morrison standing up for what was right. The people who speak up, Jason said, the people who record the truth, the people who refuse to stay silent when they see injustice. Those people give me hope. Because change doesn't come from the people being discriminated against. We've been speaking up for centuries. Change comes when the people with privilege decide to use it, when they decide that silence is complicity. Rebecca looked directly into the camera. If you're watching this interview and you've ever witnessed something like what happened to Jason Bennett, what do? You speak up, Jason said simply. You record it if you can. You refuse to look away. You be Ethan. You be Captain Morrison. You be Dorothy. You choose to be uncomfortable for a few minutes so that someone else doesn't have to be dehumanized for a lifetime. The interview continued for another hour. More questions, more stories, more painful truths laid bare under bright television lights. When it was finally over, when the camera stopped rolling and the lights dimmed, Rebecca shook Jason's hand. Thank you, she said. That was powerful. Really powerful. Jason nodded, exhausted. When does it air? Sunday night. Prime time. Rebecca smiled slightly. Millions of people will see this, Jason. Your story is going to reach a lot of hearts. Jason wasn't sure if that was comforting or terrifying. He left the studio and stepped out onto the New York City streets. It was evening now, the city alive with movement and noise. Millions of people, all rushing somewhere, all carrying their own stories, their own pain, their own prejudices. His phone buzzed. A text from Maya. Daddy, when are you coming home? I miss you. Jason felt tears prick his eyes. He typed back, "Soon, baby girl. Daddy's coming home soon." Another text came through. This one from an unknown number. "We saw what you did. We know who you are. You should have stayed quiet. Now you're going to pay." Jason stared at the message, his blood running cold. The threat was clear. Someone out there was angry that he'd spoken up, angry enough to make sure he knew they were watching. Jason looked around the crowded street. Any one of these people could be the sender. Any one of them could be a threat. He'd spent his career hunting dangerous people. Now, dangerous people were hunting him, and all because he dared to tell the truth. If you believe speaking up against injustice is worth the risk, like this story right now, subscribe if you stand with those who refuse to stay silent in the face of discrimination. Share this message. Every share amplifies voices that need to be heard. Comment. Would you have the courage to speak up like Jason did, even if it meant becoming a target? Jason sat in his living room, staring at the threatening message on his phone. His hand trembled slightly as he forwarded it to Director Chun and the FBI. Within minutes, his phone rang. "Bennett, pack a bag." Chen's voice was urgent. "We're putting you in protective custody until we trace this threat." "No," Jason said firmly. "Excuse me?" "I said no, ma'am. I'm not hiding. Not this time." Jason stood and walked to the window, looking out at his quiet suburban street. "If I hide now, they win. Every person who wants me to stay quiet wins." "Bennett, this is serious. These threats are exactly what I expected." Jason interrupted. "The moment I decided to speak up, I knew there would be consequences. But staying silent has consequences too. Bigger ones." Jim was quiet for a long moment. "You have a daughter, Jason." "I know," Jason said softly. "That's exactly why I can't hide. What kind of father would I be if I taught her to be afraid? If I showed her that telling the truth means you have to run and hide?" "A living father," Jim replied bluntly. Jason smiled despite himself. "I'll be careful. I'll take precautions. But I'm not disappearing." Chun sighed. "You're the most stubborn agent I've ever worked with." "Thank you, ma'am." That wasn't a compliment, but there was warmth in her voice. "Fine, but you're getting a security detail, whether you like it or not. And if anything feels off, you call immediately." "Yes, ma'am." Jason hung up and sat back down. The interview would air in 2 days. Sunday night, prime time. Millions of people would hear his story. And then what? His phone buzzed again. This time it was a different kind of message. From Ethan, the teenager who recorded the video. "Mr. Bennett, I just want to say thank you. Because of what happened, my school invited a civil rights speaker to talk to us. We had this amazing assembly about bias and prejudice. People are actually listening. Things are actually changing. You made a difference." Jason read the message 3 times. Things are actually changing. Was that true? Or was it just temporary outrage that would fade as soon as the next scandal hit the news cycle? The doorbell rang, startling him. Jason moved to the window cautiously and looked out. It was Dorothy, the older woman from Plain. She stood on his porch holding a covered dish, her expression patient and kind. Jason opened the door, surprised. "Dorothy? How did you—" "I have my ways," she said with a gentle smile. "I brought you some dinner. Figured you might not be eating much with everything going on." Jason stepped aside to let her in. "You didn't have to do this." "I know," Dorothy said, walking into his kitchen like she'd been there 100 times before. "But my mama taught me that when someone's going through a storm, you don't just send thoughts and prayers. You show up with food and company." She set the dish on the counter and turned to face him. "How are you holding up, son?" Jason thought about lying, about saying he was fine. But something about Dorothy's eyes made him tell the truth. "I'm scared," he admitted. "I got a threat today. And the interview airs in 2 days. And I don't know if I did the right thing. What if I just made everything worse? What if my daughter pays the price for my decision to speak up?" Dorothy walked over and took both his hands in hers. Her skin was soft and worn, weathered by decades of life. "Let me tell you something," she said. I was 7 years old when Ruby Bridges walked into that all-white school in New Orleans. You know what I remember most about seeing that on TV? Jason shook his head. I remember the adults screaming at her, grown people yelling horrible things at a 6-year-old child, threatening her, hating her just for existing in a space they thought belonged only to them. Dorothy's eyes grew distant, and I remember asking my mama why Ruby didn't just stay home where it was safe. You know what my mama told me? What? She said, "Baby, Ruby's not walking into that school for herself. She's walking for you. She's walking so that someday you won't have to be afraid." And my mama was right. Because of Ruby and people like her, I got to go to integrated schools. I got to sit at lunch counters. I got to vote without fear. Not because things magically got better, but because people braver than me decided that fear wasn't a good enough reason to stay silent. Dorothy squeezed Jason's hands. Your daughter is watching you right now. And someday, she's going to understand that her daddy didn't just save lives on that mission. He saved something bigger. He saved the idea that truth matters, that speaking up matters, that one person refusing to accept injustice can change the world. Jason felt tears streaming down his face. What if I'm not that brave? Baby, you already are, Dorothy said. Brave is not being scared. Brave is being terrified and doing the right thing anyway. They stood there in Jason's kitchen, two people connected by a shared moment of injustice that had somehow transformed into something bigger. The doorbell rang again. This time it was Captain Morrison, still in his pilot's uniform. "Mr. Bennett, I hope I'm not intruding. I wanted to check on you before my flight back to Ohio." Then came Ethan and his parents. Then came neighbors Jason had never really talked to. Then came members of his church. Then came people he'd never met who'd seen the video and wanted him to know he wasn't alone. His small living room filled with people. Black, white, Asian, Latino, young and old, different backgrounds, different stories, but all connected by a simple belief that what had happened to Jason Bennett was wrong, and that staying silent about it was worse. Someone had brought more food. Someone else brought flowers. A teenager brought a card signed by her entire high school. An elderly white man brought a photo of himself at the March on Washington in 1963. "I march with Dr. King," the old man said, his voice shaking with emotion. "And I've watched this country take 2 steps forward and 1 step back for 60 years. But moments like this, when people refuse to accept injustice, those moments move us forward. Thank you for being brave enough to speak up." Jason looked around his living room at all these faces, all these people who decided that showing up mattered, that support mattered, that he shouldn't have to face this alone. His phone buzzed. Another message. But this time, when he looked at it, his breath caught. It was from Caroline Foster. "Mr. Bennett, I know I have no right to ask for your time, but I would like to speak with you. Not for me, not to defend myself, but because I need to understand what I did. I need to face what my fear and prejudice cost you. If you're willing, I would like to meet." Caroline Foster. Jason stared at the message. Part of him wanted to delete it, to never think about Caroline Foster again, to let her live with her guilt and move on with his life. But another part of him, the part that Dorothy had reminded him existed, knew that real change didn't come from avoidance. It came from difficult conversations, from facing uncomfortable truths, from giving people the chance to genuinely change. He showed the message to Dorothy. She read it carefully, then looked up at him. "What does your heart tell you to do?" Jason thought about his daughter, about the world he wanted her to grow up in, a world where people could change, where mistakes didn't define you forever, where redemption was possible. "I think I need to meet with her," Jason said quietly. Dorothy nodded. "That takes even more courage than speaking up did." Jason typed his response. "I'll meet with you, but not alone, and not in private. If we're going to do this, we do it honestly, publicly, so others can learn from it too." He hit send before he could change his mind. Sunday night arrived. Jason sat with Maya on the couch, her small body tucked against his side. The 60 Minutes logo appeared on the screen. "Daddy, is that you?" Maya asked, pointing at the TV. Yes, baby girl. That's me. Why are you on TV? Jason pulled her closer. Because something unfair happened to Daddy, and I decided to talk about it so that maybe it won't happen to other people. Maya looked up at him with her big, innocent eyes. Were you scared? Very scared, Jason admitted. But you did it anyway? Yes. Maya smiled. That's what brave means. You told me that. Jason kissed the top of her head as his face filled the television screen. His voice began telling the story of Flight 447, the story of Caroline Foster, the story of being judged and accused and nearly destroyed by someone's prejudice, but also the story of Ethan and Dorothy and Captain Morrison, the story of people who chose to stand up, the story of truth prevailing over fear. His phone began buzzing with messages, hundreds of them, then thousands. Thank you for speaking up. You changed my mind about this. I never understood before. Now I do. I'm going to do better. Not everyone was supportive. There were still hateful messages, still threats, still people who refused to see the truth, even when it was staring them in the face. But there were more good messages than bad. More people waking up than staying asleep. More hearts opening than closing. Maya fell asleep against his chest as the interview continued. Jason held her tight and thought about the future, about the world she would inherit, about whether it would be better or worse than the one he'd grown up in. He didn't know the answer, but he knew one thing for certain. He'd done everything he could to push it in the right direction. The interview ended. The credits rolled. Jason's phone exploded with notifications. And somewhere in Ohio, Caroline Foster watched the same interview, tears streaming down her face, finally beginning to understand the weight of what she'd done. The story wasn't over. It would never really be over. But it had changed, evolved, transformed from a moment of injustice into a catalyst for conversation, for growth, for the long, difficult work of making things better. Jason looked down at his sleeping daughter and whispered, I hope I made you proud, baby girl. I hope someday you'll understand why Daddy had to speak up. Maya stirred in her sleep, a small smile on her face, safe and loved in her father's arms. And for tonight, that was enough.